It feels like
Definitely.
a lot of people, like myself included, never really cared about tarantulas or scorpions or, even conservation of a lot of different reptile species until I really got into the hobby. And by keeping them and learning a lot about them and where they're from and a lot of times how endangered or threatened they are in the wild,
Yeah.
you really kind of develop this appreciation for them. And that leads to having a desire to, be involved in conservation of that species in the wild. I've gotten multiple comments from people from South Africa, or maybe it's just the same person commenting a lot. I don't really know, but
Okay.
it seems anytime I do a video on, especially if it's like an African baboon species,
Right.
one of their comments is, I love this tarantula. I wish I could have it, but we're not allowed to keep him in South Africa. Like, what exactly are the
Okay.
rules or laws regarding, keeping different species in Africa?
So how it works with tarantulas, and I stand to be corrected on this, but my understanding is that any tarantulas that are indigenous to our country, you may not keep. So such as an OBT or something like that, because it lives here and it exists here, you are not allowed to. That's literally what it is. You're not allowed to keep it. So we can keep stuff from Malaysia and India and Brazil and all of that. But as soon as it comes to keeping a baboon species from here, it's a no-go. It's an absolute no-go. I mean, I was on a safari trip December, and we came, I can't remember what species it was, but it was a baboon tarantula. It was, really, really big. And I was like, man, I wish I could keep this thing. And it's not allowed. So you can see them roaming around, and sometimes they'll come into your house depending on where you live.
Oh, wow.
But get caught with it. And there are people that do sometimes risk keeping such a thing.
Yeah.
If the local authorities find out that you are keeping it, not only does that get removed, but your entire collection gets removed. So it's just not worth the risk. It's not worth doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's usually the videos that I have, like orange baboon tarantula or the Harpictera I always mispronounce it. Poker piece. I always want to say pokripes, but I've been corrected recently. It's poker piece, I believe.
Don't worry, I'm still learning the Latin names for things. So unfortunately, you will hear that I use the sort of normal names, I'm sorry about that. I do apologize in advance.
That's all right. No worries. No judgment. Is the baboon is it restricted to the South, like species that are endemic to South Africa, or is it like a continental thing? Like you can't keep any tarantulas that are in Africa?
Again, I stand to be corrected, but it's as far as I'm aware, there's only those that are in South Africa which are not allowed to be kept. If something comes in from Kenya, that's allowed to be kept. I believe the feather-leg baboon, is sort of more northern Africa. I believe that's that we're allowed to keep. It's just stuff that is surviving and living here and has made its home here. Mm-hmm. It's a no-go. You can't keep it, and unfortunately, that is where we get affected. With things like the OBT and stuff like that. It's a pity, but we're just not allowed to keep it.
Yeah,
and you can apply for permits to keep it, but your chances of being granted a permit are near zero unless you have a really, really good reason as to why you need it. Want to keep it.
Right, and I'm sure that's so to kind of restrict people from going out in the wild and just constantly collecting them and demolishing their population out there.
I would say our conservation in South Africa is very, very good, and they do try their best to what's the word I'm looking for here, to look after our local wildlife as much as possible. Australia is also very restrictive on that kind of stuff. We're quite similar to Australia in that way. Even some bit of New Zealand, but
that's very good though. I mean, I'm sure as a keeper of exotic pets, it can be frustrating because like the OBT is probably one of the most common tarantulas in the hobby, at least here in the US, just because they're so easy to breed and so beautiful. It seems like a lot of places will just give you place an order for tarantulas, you spend over $100, they'll just throw in an OBT. So it's
it's just it's you could have one literally stroll into your house, but you can't keep it. So we're lucky in that regard. I mean, you sort of go outside and you're looking in your garden, it's like, that's an OBT. That's pretty cool. Then there's even sections of one section of SA. So the best way I can refer to it is call it states, if you will. So I live in Gauteng state. Then there's the Northwest state, which is the main city there is Cape Town. I don't know if you've heard of Cape Town, but it's so basically in that area, you are not allowed to keep tarantulas at all. So no tarantulas may be kept.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because they are run by a different government and they sort of monitor things a little bit more stricter. So they don't want something getting out and affecting that the local species there and causing drama that side. So if you live, sort of in the Cape, I said Northern Cape earlier, it's Western Cape. If you live in the Western Cape, you can't do it. I mean, if you order online, I mean, we do have websites where obviously, people online, nothing can be taken into the Western Cape. It'll stay specifically, it's not allowed there.
Gotcha. It's
awesome.
Always kind of fascinated me because I live in West Virginia, which, is like, it's kind of, and in like the northern part of West Virginia. I'm like between Ohio and Pennsylvania, like 4 hours maybe from the Canadian border. So, I mean, it gets really cold here. Essentially, the environment here is not sustainable for pretty much any tarantula really to live. I mean, I'm sure there are a few species, but so I never really have that worry or concern that if something were to escape, it'd be able to survive in the wild, because essentially the first winter would come through and probably kill anything that got away. But like when you're living in the Southwest and places like that, it could be very viable, or especially like Florida and the Southeast, where it's a lot more humid. Asian fossorials and arboreals, tarantulas from other places of the world would more than likely be able to have plenty of prey and the right environmental conditions to live in the wild.
One only has to look at Florida's, problem with things like iguanas and Burmese pythons and stuff like that have just been released into the Everglades, and that stuff thrives there. I mean, it's like a perfect breeding ground for it, perfect climate, perfect everything.
Yeah, they even have a colony of the Chillicothe vagans, the Mexican red rump tarantulas. That had I guess, from what I remember reading, it was sometime in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s. Some had been released in an orange grove, and now there's like an established community, of Mexican red rump tarantulas in like outside Tampa. Just because like the conditions are perfect, there's plenty of prey for them, and it's very similar to the Yucatan Peninsula as far as like an environment. Where they're natives, so they're thriving out there, which is kind of wild. So if you're living in somewhere like South Africa, I could imagine it would be.
It would be a problem if things started getting out. I could see it definitely being a problem. We don't have extreme cold temperatures. It doesn't happen. I mean, our winters are not that severe. It's for these creatures, I think some creatures would die off. Maybe it would get a little bit chilly depending on where they got released. But specifically where I live, which is sort of near Johannesburg in the Gauteng state, if you want to call it, things would stand a pretty good chance of survival. It's good climate, good weather, an abundance of food. So it's the last thing you want happening is that sort of stuff happening. But I think most keepers here in SA who are in the hobby want to learn, want to conserve, want to look after these creatures, and they're proud to be a part of the hobby. It's kind of like a niche market here, and that makes it very very special in its own way. And the people involved are very special themselves. They sort of seen this as a new and exciting thing, and they want to help preserve it and look after it. That's it.
Yeah, that's actually something we talked about a lot on the podcast. It seems no matter who I'm talking to or what kind of exotic pet we're talking about, it always at some point touches on this topic that you just brought up about like just how the pet trade or keeping exotic pets and conservation kind of go hand in hand. It feels like a lot of people, like myself included, never really cared about tarantulas or scorpions or even conservation of a lot of different reptile species until I really got into the hobby. And by keeping them and learning a lot about them and where they're from and a lot of times how endangered or threatened they are in the wild, you really kind of develop this appreciation for them, and that leads to having a desire to be involved in conservation of that species in the wild, and
definitely
not wanting to get involved with brown boxing or smuggling tarantulas illegally out of countries. And
100%.
And it seems like there's this perception from people outside of the exotic pet hobby that people like us don't care about that kind of thing. Like all we care about is getting those species and keeping them in our house and breaking laws and doing whatever we can to smuggle these species out and keep them illegally or just shady and stuff like that. When it's really the opposite is true. And part of like why I'm doing this podcast and just all the different social media accounts is one of the reasons is to kind of raise awareness that pet keepers are as big into conservation as conservationists in some areas, in some ways, if that makes sense.